All right. Good morning, you all.
Morning.
My name's Priya. She, her pronouns, or any said with love are good for me. And I'm with API Chaya. Danny.
Yes, sorry. Hi, my name is Danny, and my pronouns are she, her. I am also with API Chaya. I'm a survivor advocate, and my access needs are met. I have my coffee and my water, so very excited about that. And we'd like to invite folks to put your name, pronouns, where you're calling from, and any access needs that you might have in the chat. We've got a lot of folks this morning, so I think that would be best. And yeah, we will get going here. Does everyone see the access needs and or the check-ins? And then we'll go next slide. Okay, and as folks come in, again, please just introduce yourself in the chat, put your name, pronouns, access needs, and where you're calling from. So, as we get started, want to honor our land and our ancestors. We want to honor the fact that we are stewards of this land, and we are currently occupying here in Washington, Duwamish and Coast Salish territories. And there's also 2 websites here that if you wanted to look into, how to really honor the land of our ancestors and to contribute to those, there's nativeland.ca and also realrentduwamish.org. And then next slide, we're going to do a little introduction of API Chaya.
You deserve to feel safe at home and at work. But studies show that more than half of Asian, South Asian, and Pacific Islander people experience domestic or sexual violence in their lifetimes, and up to 40% experience abuse or force at work. API Chaya can help. API Chaya empowers survivors of gender-based violence and human trafficking to gain safety, connection, and wellness. We support survivors by providing free, confidential, and language-accessible services for people to move from crisis to safety. We cultivate healing through culturally relevant support groups, community gatherings, and holistic programming that interrupt cycles of harm. And we build accountable communities through teaching skills and nurturing leadership for community members to intervene in and prevent violence. Together, we can create a more loving world where survivors can heal and thrive. We invite you to be a part of the solution. To get help or get involved, visit apichaya.org.
Thank you. Next slide. For folks coming in, again, just please put your intros into the chat, your name, pronouns, access needs, and where you're calling from.
All right, so just to set up today, we're going to, as an introductory session on transformative justice, we want to really dig into what does justice mean? What does that really mean? I think it's a word that we use a lot, but what do we mean when we say it in the realm of community accountability? What does it mean to try to live that for ourselves? We're talking about some of the values inherent and foundational to engaging in this work. Look a little, dig in a little bit to transformation and healing in action, and do some scenarios. So I just want to let folks know right now, there will be multiple breakout rooms. So we are going to ask you for participation. I mean, this is true for so many things, but particularly this kind of work, it's like, what is the brilliance that you already have? What are the solutions that you already have? How have you and your people been keeping each other safe for a long time? Right, so we're gonna ask you all to engage with that, and we're gonna, you know, give you some scenarios to think through. How would you respond? And, you know, I think that's how so many of us came to this work. I came to this work as like a survivor of violence my whole life, you know, immigrant dad from India, and it never made sense to me to have him be farther away from me. Like, I loved him, you know, and then throughout my life, people experiencing harm. So I think this is really a practice of just trying things. So we're gonna ask you all to engage in that today. So I'm warning y'all now, there's breakout rooms. We're gonna have you all do some things. And, you know, so what this is going to be is sort of an intro to the frameworks, values, and practices of transformative justice with some examples. And, you know, what it's not is going to be, we're not going to spend time saying why transformative justice is needed. And we're not really going to spend time talking about why the system is not working for survivors. There's a lot of great information out there if that's not something that you already, if you want more info on it, but we're not going to spend time on that today. This is not going to be everything you need to know to do this work or engage in a process in response to harm. And, you know, it's not going to be a space to workshop real life situations. So, you know, I think real life situations take a lot of time. And we'll be talking about what it takes to actually be able to get support. However, I do have resources on where you can get help for an actual situation if you want to talk to someone directly. And, you know, just, this won't be all the answers, which I hope no one was expecting that, but we like to say it out loud anyway. Next slide. So we're gonna start gentle with you before you have to talk to each other right away. We'd love to take a few minutes for folks to journal or reflect, you know, think, draw, whatever helps you here. These are some, you know, big questions, obviously, that we hold at the center of these processes. So who is responsible for repairing harm when it happens? Who or what makes it possible to get justice? And can achieving justice involve causing some form of harm? How so? And how do you know when justice has been achieved? What if various people impacted do not agree on what constitutes justice? So I'd love for folks to take 5 minutes here to just do some journaling, thinking, reflecting, and this is just going to set the groundwork to get your juices flowing for the rest of the session. And I will put on some music, and feel free to mute it if music is not what you want in this moment. All right, I'm sure everyone fully answered each of those questions and totally solved it. You know, I want everyone to just keep in mind what they've been reflecting on for the rest of the session. Is there, you know, 1 or 2 people who want to say anything out loud as you were thinking about some of these questions? Which, of course, there's no right answer.
I'll offer.
Thank you, John.
The smaller the scope and the narrower the definition of justice, the greater likelihood of achieving it and the less impact that it has.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And, you know, I think that's really beautiful. I think a lot about, if folks are familiar with Adrienne Marie Brown, who talks about emergent strategy, right? She talks about the small is all. And, you know, maybe the impact is smaller, but can you do 1,000 of those small things? I see you nodding, John. You're like, that's what I meant. Yeah. Anyone else want to share anything? All right. You know, and I think I just want to acknowledge too, like, this shit is real. Right? Like, when you're in a situation, people don't agree what should happen. People don't agree about next steps. People are not excited. Like, there isn't consensus most of the time. So, like, these are constant conversations that happen and have to happen over and over and over again. All right. Next slide, please.
Okay,
I
so
come from.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to introduce the video really quick. Sorry about that. Yeah, so just a little background about this video. This is a video series of folks that have a lot of experience with transformative justice, and it came about after a national gathering of about 50 people, and they put this video series together. So just wanted to give a little background. These are some of the leading folks in transformative justice. Okay, go ahead. Thank you, May.
Years of experience working in the world of domestic violence and sexual assault advocacy. What I found in the kind of provider world is that we talked a lot about survivor-centeredness, and we genuinely believed in it, but that what we offered was very limited options for survivors. And a lot of survivors did not want what we offered. For example, if we look at domestic violence, they didn't want to go to shelter. They didn't want to call the police. They didn't want to be separated from homes. Many times what they wanted was to stop violence in a relationship, but perhaps stay in that relationship, or to leave the relationship, but to leave safely. And so one of the ways I came to doing the work of transformative justice or community accountability is really coming to understand in a very deep way that so many people in my community, through my work and my own life, did not want the options that we were calling survivor-centered, and that we really, really needed to think differently about what that meant in terms of how we approached intervening in violence, but also preventing violence. So I'd say that one of the ways in which, in the work that we did at Creative Interventions, that we first questioned that was to really deepen the process through which we asked survivors what they wanted. And that seeing that people, and many of us are this way, in a moment of crisis, or when you think your only option might be to call the police or to go to a shelter, even if you didn't want to do those things, might think, how do I make those types of options fit? How do I make the police respond in a, in a more immediate way, for example? But what I have found, I think many of us have found, is if you actually ask people, what kind of world do you want to live in? What kind of responses would you really want to the violence that you have experienced? What would you want for other people in your position? They will come up with other kinds of things. It might take them a while, but a lot of what we do, and I think a lot of what we do in this work, is we give people space. And we give people space to imagine what they really want, even if they think it might be impossible. And what you find is when people really imagine what they really want, we start thinking creatively about how you might actually be able to build those things. You might actually even be able to get them in your immediate world with a little bit of thought, a little bit of organizing, with a little bit of community coming together in a different way. Or at least we can think of ways in which maybe we're not going to get that, but ways in which we can change things so that other people will be able to in the future. I think that's been a really important part of this work, and an important part of expanding what we think survivor-centered means.
The reality is most people don't use the criminal legal system. Most people do not go to the police. Most people do not go to external resources for a whole variety of reasons, and big reasons are because people are often coming from marginalized and criminalized communities. And also what people really want is to be able to address it within whatever group of people it's happening, within their family, within their school, within their friendship networks, within their religious, whatever the situation is. People always ask me, what about the rapists? And what about the murderers? And I really get why that question comes up. And I also get the feeling of despair and rage and upset because of our own experiences and what we see in the world. And I also think that a lot of times when people say that, they aren't thinking about what does justice really look like for people. Like I think about what does justice look like for me as a child sexual abuse survivor? Would justice have been putting my father in prison? Not that he would, I don't know if he would ever been put in prison, but, or you know, like if that would even work, but what do we need? What do survivors need? What do those impacted really need? What would justice really look like? And I think when we really ask those questions and have the space to ask those questions, I'm not sure that most people would say they want incarceration. Even, you know, there's so many people who've had egregious harms against them, and they still didn't necessarily, incarceration and that whole legal process never feels like justice. It never feels like healing. It never feels like, you know, you could really move on from that, you know? So what would you need to feel like justice was done? And I think for a lot of survivors, it's like if the people around them really believed them and cared for them and sat with them. And, you know, it's also about the person who caused the harm, but it's also everybody around them. And so I think that question, what does justice really, what would that look like for you or for anyone who's been harmed in that way? I think we don't ask that question. And also, I don't think incarceration, it's not gonna change anyone. There's no space for accountability. There's no space for really reconciling with the harm that you've caused. There's no process for you to really even have to face.
Thanks, May. Next slide.
I come from many years of experience working.
Right. You know, so I encourage just everyone, yes, to keep thinking about what does justice really mean. You know, API Chaya works with survivors every day, hundreds of survivors a year. And I think like Anne was saying in the video, so often people say like, I want to be able to stay in my own home. You know, I want to be able to like go to my church and not feel like ostracized. I want my children to be able to be safe in their home. And, you know, I think that the state-based systems have so co-opted our imaginations around how can we support people? How can we ask them and sit with them enough to know what they really want? And so Miriam Kaba, my friend, wonderful woman, if you don't know her, look her up. She talks about, and she really always hits home that community-based responses are actually the mainstream. Right, the vast majority of time that we are responding to harm, it is within community, if there's any response at all. However that response lands, like most people are not turning to the state for help the majority of the time that violence is happening. And this work has been happening forever, for generations, and especially in communities who've never had access to the state systems that see them as human. You know, I think a lot about like my grandma grew up in a small village in India, and like everyone in her family forever, every woman in her family had been in an abusive relationship. And she would like, you know, she would cook food and like go deliver it to specific women in crisis, right? So that they can like go lay down and have a break and not have to cook that day. And like how that is like actually a meaningful response, right? How that helped her. She helped other people get some form of safety by doing that. And so, you know, people are turning to the folks who are already in their lives, right? That is the first place people turn. And so people might not respond at all. People might respond in small ways. People might have full-blown processes, but that is the norm. And then, so there's the norm, and then there's like the responses that get funding, right? And that is the criminal-esque responses. And so when we do this work, we really talk about we want to create more options. We want to create spaces for survivors to seek healing and accountability without being forced in any way to go through a process that doesn't work for them. We want to create spaces where community members have the tools to prevent harm and abuse without causing more harm and trauma. And we want to create spaces where people who cause harm can move towards true accountability. And so this is really about more options. Next slide.
Okay, and so when we're thinking about, you know, the word justice and like what that actually means, and the differences between, you know, the terms punitive justice, restorative justice, and transformative justice, you know, it's helpful to kind of understand what each of these mean and how differently they look in community and on the ground. And so when we're thinking about punitive justice, we're really just looking to see, what happened, who did it, who was responsible, and what do we do with that person? Okay, what kind of punishment do they deserve? Versus restorative justice focuses more on harm and obligations. So who has been harmed? What needs and obligations arise as a result of the person being harmed? Okay, like who is affected by that harm, and then who can and must meet these needs or obligations. Okay, so like why did that person cause the harm? What's going on there? And then transformative justice, kind of I feel like encompasses more, goes a little bit further when we're talking about harm and oppression or conditions that led to the harm happening, and then healing. So what conditions led to the violence happening in the first place, right? One example that we like to give is thinking about a high school student, a girl trashing the girls' bathroom. Okay, so in punitive justice, we would identify that it was her that did it. We would ask her to clean it up, and then she would get suspended, right? So that would be what punitive justice would be looking like. Restorative justice, we would find out, okay, so who had done this, but then who was harmed in this, who else did it affect? Maybe the bathroom was closed, maybe the janitor was affected by it, or the custodian. We would have that person clean up the bathroom, and then we would find out like what else needs to happen as far as like how does this affect the community, and what needs to happen in order for this not to happen again. Transformative justice leans a little bit more in that we find out who has done it, we ask the person to clean it up, we find out who is affected, and then we go a little bit further asking like what led to, okay, what led to this happening, like what is going on in that person's world, what is happening in the community, what are happening in greater systems that would cause this person to react in that way, and figure out the bigger picture, and finding out how we can address this harm and make it so that hopefully the harm doesn't happen again in the future.
I just want to jump in there.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is just to pull some of these differences out, and I really want to say like there are many models of community responses to harm. Some are more formal, like restorative justice programs that receive state funding. Some are more informal. There's a lot of different terms and names for these. Many people are doing this work without naming it. And for some folks, the differences between these terms indicate to them very important political or ideological frameworks, and sometimes other people use them interchangeably. And so what we're doing is using kind of systems-based understandings to help clarify values. And I think I want to be really clear too that the way we are defining restorative justice here is really about how the state is co-opting that term, and it is different than the way Indigenous folks have been practicing restorative justice for generations, right? But we're in a time where like Dan Satterberg, the prosecutor of Seattle, is like, let's do restorative justice, and we'll have the prosecutors sit in circle with people who are charged with crimes, and we're like, girl, that ain't it, so that's part of why we're drawing this distinction here, right? And so the difference between restorative justice in that sense, in the systems-based sense of restoring things to how they were before the harm happened, right? And then transformative justice would look at that and say, like, maybe it was pretty garbage before. Like, there's a reason that harm happened. Like, maybe is this girl being bullied for being queer? Like, we need to also address that. And that's why she trashed the bathroom in the first place. We need to also address that. Next slide, please. So I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone, right? But violence doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of conditions, big ones: capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, settler colonialism. And it also comes out of things like a culture of punishment, fear, shame, blame, generational trauma. And, you know, what we seek to do in transformative justice when we're responding to violence is literally draw these things out and make a list. Like, what were all the conditions that led to this happening? So, you know, for example, in our work at API Chaya, we're focused on gender-based violence. So the main thing we're responding to is rape, we'll also list out all the other forms of violence that happened. You know, what are the conditions that allowed sexual violence to happen in this way? Individually, micro, macro. And so a lot of the time in community when we're doing this work, we get really focused on specific instances. And right, because that's when we hop to, that's when we can get people motivated to come in, is when something really horrible happens. And we always in transformative justice responses want to draw the line between how these are circular effects. And we want to keep thinking about, even if we can't have the perfect response to an instance, there is a way that over time we can work towards shifting some of the collective conditions that allowed this to happen in the first place. Next slide.
Sorry, my microphone was off. That's just never going to get better, I don't think. Okay, so we are going to do an activity. And Priya, are we putting this on Jamboard?
No, just do it in the chat.
Chat box, okay. Okay, so yeah, we're going to be doing just a brief activity here of asking you to put some, you know, what are some values of community accountability and transformative justice? What are some values that you think of? So we'd like to invite folks to put that in the chat. And then what are some beliefs that are drivers of community accountability and practices? So maybe take about 5 minutes to write down some values or beliefs. And then we'll invite some folks to share afterwards.
Well, yeah, I think just throw them in the chat as they come up to you, as they're coming to you.
Yeah.
And we can read them out loud as they're in there. I mean, you all came to this, you know, workshop for a reason. When you think about community accountability in TJ, inherent worth of each individual, absolutely.
Love for individuals and community. Awesome. Respect for elders.
Love that.
Mm-hmm. Honesty.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Belina. Oh, now they're coming. Oh boy. Okay. I know, right? Respect for children and love in all the ways it shows up. Value life belief. We are the change. Seeing the humanity in people. Love that, D. Adams. Value of transformative justice, to have a healthy community. We can't throw people away. Absolutely. Commonly held moral beliefs. Seeing others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Understanding that respect should be reciprocated, transparency. Belief in the value of all people. These are all wonderful.
Yes. Belief that we all have place in community and hold the responsibility to make it possible. I love that. I love that you bring up like that we all have a role, right? Minimize the doing of harm. Yep, absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I love, keep going as you want to share. This is all brilliant. And then
Absolutely. Next slide. And so here are just a few things, you know, that to add to that: interdependence, harm reduction, healing justice, shifting power. I heard this a bunch. which, you know, was awesome. No one is disposable. Humanity for all was mentioned. Long-term vision of liberation, you know, non-binary, not like, you know, black and white thinking. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be many things.
Yeah, and you know, just think a lot about shifting the thinking from getting even to getting well, and really thinking about how do we be in right relation with each other, and really holding up healing, holding up individual and collective accountability, holding up reintegration, and really moving from kicking out to drawing in ways that center healing and wellness. Great. Next slide. All right, y'all, we're gonna go into breakout rooms. So I hope you all are ready to chat with each other. I know you've all been thinking about this and have some thoughts. So when thinking about community-based solutions to violence, what makes you feel hopeful and what makes you feel concerned? So May, if you can put folks into groups of 4 or 5, we're going to give you about, can't go into a breakout. That's okay, Christina. I think you can just say, I think you can reject the invitation when it comes, if that's an okay way to do it. But then May, if you can put folks into groups of 4 or 5, and we'll just take about 7 minutes for you to chat about what are things that make you feel hopeful and what are things that make you. Hi, everyone. I love when we come back from breakouts because everyone still has their camera on for like 30 seconds, and so I get to see you all a little bit. What came up for
Oh, I was just going to say, sorry for the abrupt breakout. It's always jarring.
I know, I'm like, you broadcast a minute left, but then it is what it is, y'all. So what came up for folks? What are some things y'all were thinking? I'd love to hear your voices, or feel free to also put it in the chat.
In our breakout group, I think there was a real difference between how hopeful people felt when you framed it as being a short-term window versus a longer-term window. And I think hope increases with the stretching out of time. But right now, in the very short term, it feels less hopeful.
Thank you. Yeah. I think definitely one of the things that I've learned is that it's really hard to use this as crisis intervention. And that's what we want, right? And that's what we need. That's what we're seeking, because so many of us are in crisis, and that's violence creates crises. And you know, when we're talking about things like healing and getting in right relation, and accountability, you know, it's hard. So I think we have to balance, like, how can we reach for safety in the short term? Like, can we get people safe? And that's not the same as how do we actually reach accountability? How do we actually reach healing, which is really long term. And hope is hard. Miriam Kaba also says hope is a discipline, which I sometimes feel that. And sometimes I'm like, shut up, Miriam. I don't know. It's too hard. Life is hard. What else came up for folks?
Anybody from group 2 want to share?
Well, Devin, what came? Oh, go ahead.
I don't know what group I was in. That's why.
No, share. It's for anybody.
Well, understandably so, folks are, because of current times and events, just struggling with hope. I think for me, I just brought up that, you know, when thinking about the fact that community has a yearning for the opportunity and has the space to come up with solutions to harm. It's just for me, that's hopeful. And I think also there's a collective wisdom that, you know, we learn from each other and see from each other that keeps me engaged. And I think the concern also is just that, you know, healing or this RJ process isn't linear, and we've been so conditioned to see things in a linear way that when it doesn't when it doesn't show up the way we anticipate, then we can give up on it and assume that it doesn't work, or it's, not, it won't happen in the way that we would like it to. And so we kind of shut it off as an option. But yeah, that was kind of that was my thoughts. I know some of the folks in the group, are in their own space and trying to find hope, and like I said, understandably so.
Absolutely. Thank you, Devin. Understandably so is so real. And, even when I do full-blown processes, usually they last 1 to 2 years. And there's always a point in it where I'm just like, this ain't working. Like, I don't know where we're getting, this is not working. Everyone's starting to hate each other. Can we stay together long enough to get to get anywhere where we want to go? All right. Thank you all. Thank you for sharing out loud. I appreciate it. And Evan, thanks for letting me call on you because I happen to know you. And your video was on. So I was like, I'll call on you. You already know that about me. I like calling on people. All right, next slide, please. So, and I think I just want to, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the hopes, like what I think about as the hopes of these kinds of processes. And I don't want to let go of the concerns, right? Because there's so many things we try that don't work, right? And there's so many things that are so painful and do cause more harm and do cause more trauma. And, I used to it felt really hard to respond unless I had the perfect answer. I was like, unless I have exactly what's right, I don't know what to do. And I think the biggest thing we learned is like, just try things. Like, even if it's a mistake, you're going to learn from it. And at the end of the day, I promise you, it's like better than the police and a state-based response. And so even the tiniest things, what can we do? Just try things. And so the hope of these kinds of processes is seeking transformation, right? And I think a deep belief that transformation is possible. I think that's something to really examine within yourself. Like, do you believe that that's true? Do you believe that people can change? Do you believe that systems and cultures can change? And if not, maybe this isn't the kind of work for you. And like, that's also okay. Do you know what I mean? I don't mean that, that maybe this just isn't the kind of work for you, but you have to believe that change is possible. And it doesn't have to be from the exact person who harmed you or a specific instance of violence, because maybe that person will never change. But do you feel like the people around you can, that some of your family can, that some of your network can change? So, we really hold that people, systems, and cultural norms are capable of transformation. And transformation is more than intention. It takes strategy, planning, time, study, self-reflection, a support system helping you, and the tools to implement new habits and beliefs. Which again, we're talking about, right, a long timeline. None of that is easy or quick. Next slide. Devin was just speaking to some of this, but healing is a process and not a destination. And while we hope for healing, it can't be bounded, right? The intention of TJ is to give folks tools, support, and agency to address harm and create a strategy to grow forward. So we're making space for trauma, how trauma shows up. We're making space for how to challenge ourselves to do the work and work on our healing. It's the beginning of a healing process, right? Any kind of community-based intervention, it's the beginning of a healing process. And that's it, right? Like, that's actually peak of what we're offering. And that's a lot. I don't want to minimize that. That's a lot. Next slide. Same video series as before. So go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
I think when people have caused harm.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say that, yeah, this is just, this is the same part of the same video series as before. And we're going to spend the next few minutes thinking about how to support people who are causing harm and taking accountability. We're more practiced at supporting survivors. though in limited and difficult ways, and less practiced at even thinking about how to support someone in being held accountable for serious harm. So just setting up this video.
The first thing that needs to happen is an interrogation of the root systems of harm in their own lives and in their own relationships, right? So I think too often we're just like, you caused harm, and it's like it's in a vacuum or something. At some level, it's not like they woke up like, let me cause this harm, right? So really checking on and paying attention to intention, even though it's not more important than impact, but really being like, I recognize your intention as a human being is not to be a horrific, harmful person. Actually, there's like people that I'm supporting right now who are causing harm, and when I interrogate it even just a little bit, it's like, this trauma happened when I was a child. I was treated like this, and like no one's going to treat me like that again. Or I was socialized to think this was normal or okay. Or I was never given tools to balance my temper. I was never given tools to process strong emotion. I don't know how to have a broken heart. I don't know how to express my sexual desires. Like there's just like stuff that people are like, don't learn. And I don't think it's like, that's an excuse. You didn't learn that, so now you get to be an asshole. But I do think there's something that's like, okay, that's what happened and shaped you. And now what we need to do is figure out, how do we reshape you, right? How do you opt into a new shape, a new way of being in the world that is not causing harm to people you say you care about or love or just want to be in community with?
I've seen a lot of folks say, oh, you're just talking about your trauma as a distraction. And also, we've noticed that if folks are able to process that trauma, they're much more ready to take accountability for the impact that they've had. Often it's feeling like no one cared when I was hurt. Yeah. And so why am I supposed to care when someone else is hurt? And it's like, well, you should still care, but also we care that you were hurt, just not to the degree that we don't care about this other person too, right? And so it's about holding kind of complexity and nuance.
There's an incredible quote from Danielle Serid that is like, no one experiences harm for the first time when they do harm. And I really love that, because I'm like, oh yeah, like, what were you like as a child? And this helps me with, when I'm mediating people, I'm often like, can I see you? Can I imagine you at age 4? Can I imagine you at age 7? Like, when did that first harm happen in your life? How long have you been a broken or scarred or wounded being? And how far has that scarring taken over what you think is your personality and what healing is possible?
People who are stuck in patterns of lashing out and harming folks, a lot of times that comes from a place of feeling like you're not seen and held and loved as a person. In our experience, when you first have a conversation with that person, it comes to the surface that often some of their needs are not being met. And so that could be material needs, that could be social needs, that could be emotional needs. And if you come to that person, or rather come at that person and say, we don't care what's going on with you, you messed up and you need to step up and take accountability, that person would feel like they're not being seen as a full human and a full person in the equation. And in our experience, there's just a much greater openness to taking accountability if you feel seen, respected, held, really just treated with human dignity.
I learned a lot from Philly Stands Up and the work that they did to support accountability. What I saw was that they stayed close to people for a long period of time. They met with them regularly, and they really started from a position of caring and of love. They understood that people had needs, that people who had done harm also had needs around having lives of meaning, of having people that cared about them, about having housing, about having food, about having work, about having an income, and all of those things that they needed to thrive.
Oh, I love that video. Okay, so next slide. Oh, no, sorry. We're on the slide. Sorry. Accountability. 4 parts to accountability. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because this is a huge topic, and we definitely have, we could spend an entire 2 hours or series talking about, what is accountability and what it looks like. So we're just going to go over it real quickly, but also want to let you know that we do have community education series that talk about, just spend the entire time talking about accountability. And there's a lot of great stuff also at the Northwest Network. So, the 4 parts of accountability, self-reflection, basically understanding actions and impact, willingness to make things right. We've got apology or apologizing, acknowledging and taking responsibility for hurt and harm, vulnerability, demonstrating that you understand the impact of the harm that was caused, repair, making amends, rebuilding trust. It's interdependent with apologizing, and behavior change. So changing patterns, recognizing, identifying and changing underlying patterns, okay? And this is probably the most difficult and long-term, but also the most important is the actual changing of behavior, right? So that we're just going over it really briefly, but we'll talk a little bit more about, how to support people in taking accountability later on in response to gender-based violence. But next slide. Okay, and so then when we're thinking about, harm and oppression that exists on many levels, okay, so like what we had talked about earlier about, internal, interpersonal, institutional structures, so like the micro, macro of accountability. And, we want to, sorry, I'm struggling with this slide. Priya, can you help with the slide?
Absolutely. Just as oppression happens on all these levels, right? We need accountability to happen on all these levels. So these are the building blocks of creating the communities that we want, and that are values aligned. And so it starts with ourselves, right? Grace Lee Boggs, transform yourself to transform the world. And that leads to us having accountability within our relationships, from the smallest things to the biggest. And that's how we get accountable communities. And support means supporting people to choose accountability, right? Not forcing, not enabling, right? You can't hold someone accountable. Someone has to choose accountability. Danny, I'm going to just introduce the video. Is that okay?
Yep. Sounds good.
Okay. So next slide. So we are going to go into an example. So this video is called Hollow Water. It's based on an Indigenous community in Canada. And it's about 10 minutes long, and it draws out how they responded to an epidemic of child sexual abuse in their community. So I want everyone to be prepared. This video is intense. It has parents talking about sexually abusing their children and children talking about their experience of that. And it is an example of a community coming together and all people involved feeling like the process was meaningful to them and led to some form of healing and repair. And so, we're an organization that works with gender-based violence. There's many ways to address, there's many types of harm we want to address with these systems. And I think for some of the things we might imagine are the most intense, egregious forms of harm, like change is really possible. So I want to just really encourage you all to take care of yourself, do what you need to do to feel okay in this moment, walk around, drink some water, take a pause. And after the video, we're going to take a few deep breaths together, and then we're going to go immediately into breakout rooms to talk about some, just to respond to some questions. So again, please take care of yourself. We trust you all to do what you need to do to feel okay. If you want to chat, if you need support, you can reach out to me or Danny. And then let's play the video.
The eastern shores of Lake Winnipeg in central Manitoba. Beautiful, peaceful, an ideal place to call home. But in this community, home has been a nightmare, especially for children. A place where secrets and silence imprisoned young and old alike. Hollow Water is an Ojibwe reserve, 200 kilometers north of Winnipeg. 450 people live here. 2/3 of them are the victims of sexual abuse. The offenders are grandparents, mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, cousins. Few in the community have escaped the pain of this betrayal, and for decades they've kept it buried.
We couldn't just work with the victim, we also had to work with the offender because we felt that the offender was the core of the problem. and to deal with victims alone, as is done in society, and not dealing with the offender, you're only dealing with half the problem. So it really helped us see the total picture. And not only individuals, but we also had to work with the families of both.
Richard and Deborah Kennedy were accused of sexually abusing 2 of their 5 children. By law, they were the responsibility of the Manitoba justice system. But that approach hadn't stopped abuse in the past, nor had it rehabilitated anyone. If Hollow Water couldn't find a way to make the couple admit their guilt, they would be returned to the courts. It was a bold step and not without risk, but the Crown Attorney's office agreed. Richard and Deb were given a 2-year probation.
I fell into that the denial system. I told people that the charges weren't true. I even lied to myself, saying that they weren't true.
I understood why my children were taken with my charges, but it was very hard to believe my husband's charges.
I tried to find a way to come out of that and tell the truth. And the more I thought about it, the more lies I picked up.
All of you know the fear of talking coming into the group.
There were more than the Kennedys needing help, but the community lacked counselors. Workshops and training programs were held, and the women of Hollow Water were the first to sign up.
We want to help them. We don't believe in jail because they don't get no help in jail. The way we see jail system is, sure, they'll go to jail. Sure, people see us as punishment, but we don't see it that way. That's not punishment, because they go in there and nothing happens in there, and they just get angry, and they come back to the community and do the same thing over again. So that cycle just continues. And what we're trying to do is to stop that cycle, to start helping these people that we believe in healing. I believe in healing. I believe they can heal.
What really changed my denial was they had this men's group in Hollow Water. They've already started, and they sat me in there. And I've sat with some offenders, and that's the day I felt I wasn't alone.
It was a pain passed on from generation to generation, a legacy of abuse Richard and Deb knew only too well.
We still have to. This is something like our family tree, and alcohol, all kinds of abuse is involved, and all these green lines that's the families that were sexually abused within the families. Richard Sr. was sexually abused, verbal abused, physically abused,
and
mentally abused, and
I think that was a suicidal what you put on here, eh?
We started off like family tree, and then what kind of abuse we came from.
This is the hardest thing to do. And with our kids, it won't be that much, because this is where it's going to stop. Eh? So it's not going to be that much colors there, not much of abuse going through there, and
it's going to stop this year with our children and with their children.
Richard and Deb's probation required them to attend individual counseling sessions, addiction treatment, and sharing circles. At the end of their 4th year of probation, their children were brought back and placed in foster homes within the community.
Hollow Water couldn't live with themselves and know that when we report cases that our children would be put through the legal system. And that is, they have to testify against their offender in a court setting. They have to convince judges and defense lawyers and crown attorneys that what they're talking about is the truth. I can't do that. How can I expect my child to do that? And this is where we bring in our understanding of protecting children in our traditional way. These children are gifts from Creator. It's our job to protect them. So the adults that are harming these children, it's their responsibility to make sure that the children won't have to go through the formal court system.
On the other hand, with our concept of traditional healing based on spirituality,
Kathy Lewis, a vice chair of the Parole Board of Canada, worked closely with Aboriginal offenders. She was particularly interested in Hollow Water's alternative to incarceration.
Because your approach is so much cost effective for the amount of money that gets spent on incarcerating offenders. And I'm not just talking here about Aboriginal offenders, I'm talking here of many offenders in the country. That money could be funneled to the kind of processes that you've developed.
It sure hasn't been an easy journey for these two girls. They really challenged us a lot. They insisted that they needed to work with their parents, and yet under child welfare, those kinds of things are just not done. I mean, especially in incest situations, once children are removed, it's almost a guarantee that they'll never get back together.
At times I feel the tears come down when we sit around, and it's painful to tell my kids that. And I know how they feel about me now today. It's nice to get the trust, especially from my two daughters, Mona and Vanessa. I can feel that trust from them to me. And I can also feel the trust within myself going through this healing.
I've seen a lot of changes in them. My mom hardly yells. She just sits there and doesn't do anything. And then when we get into an argument, she doesn't butt in. She just sit there and listen. And my dad, we could trust him. Like, I trust my dad being alone with him. I couldn't trust him. And then after a while, I started trusting him. We sit down and we talk about what he done. And he keeps telling us over and over how sorry he is. And I come a long ways.
I dream of a time when our children's spirits are going to be really strong, much stronger than us. And they'll understand the laws of Creator. They'll understand the values. They'll live by the values of our people. And I think that's where our children are leading us to.
Richard and Deb had struggled to admit the truth and regain the trust of their children and their community. For others, that journey is just beginning. Today, more than 200 people are involved in Hollow Water's holistic circle healing approach. And the team has undertaken yet another challenge: healing the victims and offenders of family violence. They know their struggle is far from over, but at least the healing has begun.
Thank you. I want to just invite folks to take 3 deep breaths. And then May, if you can put folks into breakout rooms of 4 or 5, and I put the questions in the chat, but just what are you feeling? Is there harm that you think cannot be atoned for? What stood out to you? What feels alive for you after watching? We're going to take 10 minutes in the breakout rooms. Welcome back, everyone. I'd love to just hear from you all. What was that conversation like? Anything folks want to share? John, I see you unmuted. I don't know if that was on purpose.
Once again, really lovely sharing in our group, and I kind of wanted to talk about this notion about that atonement is possible for all purposes, but I think the manner in which it is executed, the intentionality behind it, the follow through, like, you know, these are things that are also important aspects of just not settling with atonement for our harm, but actually perhaps building back.
What else came up for folks? I see a clap emoji. Thank you. I love the reactions. Please use them. I'm not good on Zoom, even though it's been 2 years. I'm such an in-person person. So I appreciate all reactions, all facial expressions. Yeah.
I shared with the folks that, you know, I felt a little I felt conflicted in understanding, you know, as someone who has experienced harm but also caused harm.
Mm-hmm.
Just how, you know, trying to keep in mind the context in which harm happens when trying to determine what is atoned, like what can be atoned for and what can't. I would hope that people in the community would see the value of all folks of healing. I think when folks that have caused harm have space to heal, then they can really show up in the way that they should to actually atone for what has happened. And in order for that to take place, there needs to be some supports in place. And then what was brought up too was the fact that, you know, all of this is occurring in the context of being in an oppressive system. The fact that they have to get permission from the government in order for this to happen is really troubling also. And I think also it highlights the fact that, I think it's a saying that I've heard in space, like there's that 200% reality, right? Where a person is 100% responsible for the harms they cause, but then there's also those conditions that were created that folks have to be responsible for. And when I think about the systems that have been in place, the oppression that community has experienced over such a long time, that, you know, folks are operating in survival strategies and within that oppression, and that government holds a lot of responsibility in why that harm has happened in the first place. Yeah, Sujatha Baliga, yeah, that's right. So I just, like, there's so many components to it, and then trying to unpack it in a matter of 10 minutes is such a challenge. But yeah, just feeling conflicted, and then understanding the feelings that folks in that space are in our breakout room are dealing with. It's just, it's a heavy topic, and, my heart's with them and thinking about what they're going through.
Thank you. You mean you didn't solve all the problems of harm and abuse in 10
For
minutes?
real.
Is that what you mean? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's like I think that's the thing too, is like not having that sense of need to be to figure all that stuff out, but understanding that collective wisdom will get us there eventually. Just got to stay engaged.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Maybe does one more person want to share?
I'll share. So I think that for me, when I was watching it, it kind of brought me back to my own space, right? And so thinking about my own trauma as I've grown up, and kind of like now as an adult, I'm 39, so I'm still asking those who have harmed me to at least like tell me the truth, right? So because I really want to break the generations of cycles that we continue to do in my family. But I appreciate the fact that the community said, we need to actually have them tell the truth. And their truth, and they were hesitant at first to tell their truth, but when they did, it was almost like, I'm going to shift this so that it doesn't continue to pass down in my lineage. My children will be able to not have to keep dealing with the same cycles that we've had to keep dealing with the same cycles. And when the children said, I felt safe, I feel safe now, I feel safe, they told the truth. Like they're now on this journey of healing. Their parents are on the journey of healing. But when they went down the family tree and they actually wrote it down, it was heartbreaking because you're actually seeing it, like not in your head, but on paper. And if you think about it, right, and as cultures and family units and all these things, if you actually put it on paper and the things that you experience, it also makes it real. So you can't hide from them anymore. And I really resonated with the fact like they are really supporting those who have harmed others, but they're supporting those who have been harmed by actually naming it. And I think that's important too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you, everyone. And yes, the power of just truth telling, right? The power of truth telling. And, some of when I do this work, like there's all kinds of people who harmed me that I'm never going to get accountability from, but seeing the power of other people transform helps me with my own healing, right? Helps me see that maybe it is possible, even if not from the folks who directly harmed me, that I can see other people doing this truth telling and changing. All right. Thank you all. Please, again, take care of yourselves. Go for a walk later, drink lots of water. And, I also want to lift up, right? Like maybe the survivor is like, fuck this, fuck the person who harmed me. I don't want anything to do with this process. I'm out. I don't care. I'm not trying to sit in circle. I'm not trying to hear from them. And that is 1,000,000,000% okay too, right? They get to choose, and they should still get all the support for their own healing and safety. And the community should still be able to come around the person who caused harm and say, you still need to change. We still want healing for you, and you still need to change. Even if your survivor is like, fuck right off and I don't want anything to do with you. Like, right, we're still holding the values of TJ. We're saying we don't want to kick you out. So now that you're here and you still need, this is still not okay. We still need you to shift and change, and we need to shift the conditions. And so both people should get support, even if their processes have nothing to do with each other. All right, and we
Can
will...
I share something? Yeah. Sorry,
Absolutely.
I know there's the shares that have been transpiring. There's another element about in it. Sorry, I muted myself. There's another element to atonement as well, in just the aspect that it's the change. It's making the change when something wrong occurs, and it's a person attempting to make a change when something wrong occurs, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that person that did it to you. And it's weird to look at atonement in the aspect of I don't like that word, the person that might have received what occurred being the one making the atonement too. Like that's I'm sorry, maybe it's personal, so it just kind of hit me a little differently, like because sometimes we're expecting to receive that change from the cause, and we will and what you said, Priya, about it not occurring, we might never get that, but how can we atone with ourselves for what happened?
Thank you, for sharing. I just feel like Yeah, it's also real, you know, again, I have no answers. It's like, it's painful and it's hard, and I really appreciate you sharing that. Anything else folks want to share? I appreciate hearing your voices. All right. Let's go back to the PowerPoint, please, May. I think we covered this. I think the videos covered this already.
I think so too. I did want to name real quick. Oh, can you go back real quick? I just wanted to name, you know, I wanted to shout out what John had wrote in the chat. That kind of really sums up all of this, is the necessity of creating a safe place for truth telling to happen, right? I feel like it goes to the essence of what, you know, how do we make accountability possible? What are the conditions? And also going back to what, is it Devin? Devin had said about, you know, that people who cause harm need the support. They need that support to make that accountability happen. You know, we need to make sure their basic needs are met. It's going to take time. We need to build those relationships. And yeah, so all people involved need support. Exactly. Anyway, I just wanted to name those two things that John and Devin had said because they were powerful to me. Next slide.
So I just wanted to give one example of like, what does it look like when going through an accountability process with someone? Because I feel like that can feel really amorphous and like, what, you know, are you just like coddling them? Or is it just they're getting so much more support? Or like, what is happening? Like, are they really working towards repair? You know, what does that mean? And so API Chaya had the opportunity to partner with an amazing local org, Collective Justice, to do long-term circles in Monroe Prison. They were weekly for 15 months. So grow that no joke. And HEAL stands for Healing, Education for Accountability and Liberation. And one of the things that we ask folks to, you know, and for context, I would say most of the folks participating were incarcerated for murder. That's the majority of the harm that was caused of the folks who were there. And so we asked them to do these accountability letters. I think I just bring this home to say, like, this is hard work, right? We're asking people to sit in the fire. We're saying describe in detail, and they'll write, you can read it on the screen, so I won't read it out loud, right? But they go and they write this out, and then they read it out loud to the circle. So they're also reading it out loud to other people in the group, a group of folks who have also caused harm. And then folks are asking them questions, right? Asking them to deepen where they are, asking them to think about the impacts, the whys, the root causes, what has happened to them. And so, you know, for each kind of topic that I've listed on the left, right, there's other exercises, other self-reflections that they write and bring back to the group. And, you know, we're talking about care, we're talking about trauma, shame, gender socialization. You know, what was a challenge talking to a bunch of men in prison about toxic masculinity? But we got there. We made some movement. Intervention, supporting survivors, and you know, again, the power of building relationships, having the time, creating space where vulnerable honesty is possible. And you know, there was also simultaneous circles in community that were supporting survivors of harm too, right? Because I think that's obviously we must do that. So some of the changes we witnessed, you know, in the potential of this work is people said that their parenting had improved. People cried for the first time in many years. We had a couple people come out as queer. There was better support for some of the trans folks who were incarcerated. We had more engagement around people talking to other men about toxic masculinity. Some folks began paying restitution where they didn't before, an increase in empathy, realizing other harm that they had caused and wanting to confront that too, that they weren't incarcerated for necessarily. And, you know, I think just a renewed sense of hope. And, you know, that's just my reflection as one of the facilitators of these circles, but those are all changes that I think I was able to witness that as hard as everything feels so often, and as hard it is to hold on to hope, like I really try to hold on to those moments, those tiny moments where we can live into the world that we want, that makes me be able to believe that change is possible. And so this is just one example, because I feel when I started to do this work, I was like, but what happens when you all sit down? But like, what do you do? That felt like a black hole to me. So I just wanted to give an example. Next slide. So, we're near the end of our time, but I still want to do scenarios. So we're going to do our last round of breakout rooms. And this is a scenario in 2 parts. So it's about, you'll just read it. It's pretty self-explanatory, but the first part is you're taking on the perspective of one side of it. And the second part, you're taking on the perspective of a different side of it. And so I think there's not that many people left, right? No, I don't know. Yeah. So May, if you can split folks into groups again. And then I think it's going to be 4 groups. So groups 1 and 2, part 1. And then groups 3 and 4, part 2. Does that make sense? So it has a, like, 2/3 of a page scenario and then a couple of questions. So read through it and answer the questions. And then we will debrief. So May, if you could split folks up into 4 groups, and we'll give 12 minutes. Welcome back, all. I'm sure that was not enough time.
Never enough time.
At all. I apologize for that. I encourage you to actually just take both parts 1 and 2. I like just seeing it from different sides. And I guess for either of you on either side, I've definitely been both of those. You're like, let's arrange to do this thing for someone. And then you're like, how dare you support this person? Or I don't know. Yes. So any reflections folks want to share? Maybe 1 or 2 people. All right, that's okay. I encourage you to yes, Devin.
I was just,
Go, Devin.
We had a really good conversation. I think.
Wait, which part were you?
We were Genevieve's friend.
Okay.
And just like you kind of like spring into support mode, like you want to help this person, but then like really the importance of having a plan, like planning out what happens afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Just how critical that is in that process. Celia had shared that sometimes you find yourself responding, and then when you don't have a plan, like the tensions that can be created because there's really no end, like you don't see a person moving through the harm, like the what had happened, and that could potentially impact the relationship that you have with Genevieve, right? And so for me, what I got out of it was just like really the importance of, once you are being able to support that person through that initial phone call and the night, like really being intentional about planning out what support looks like within a community, so that everyone has capacity to provide those supports and that you're moving towards some solution.
Thank you. So thank you, John. I'm very committed to ending on time as a human, so we will end. I wanted to put here, I know that talking about these things bring up so much. And so, API Chaya is here for you. I also put in the chat the Interrupting Criminalization Help Desk. And it's also there if you have, something in your own life personally you're trying to deal with, that exists to help you brainstorm through it. How could you respond if you're facing challenges, then you're not feeling you can have support, like helping think through creative options. And that takes you straight to Shira Hassan, who has been literally doing this for like 40 years. So she's a badass, someone with a lot of experience who can help you. So it's free. Obviously, I would not give you something that ain't free. It's free. So please, you know, reach out if you need it. And just appreciate you all being here. Again, please take care of yourselves. We talked about some really intense things today. I think the message that we have for you all is just try things, practice, you know, things that feel small can make all the difference. So thank you all. Appreciate the amazing conversation that you all had. And, you know, I'll ask the COO folks to share the PowerPoint and a resource sheet if that's interesting to you all. Thanks all. Oh, I went 1 minute over. I'm so sorry. But
Thank you.
yeah. Bye, y'all.
Bye.